Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. I welcome you all. I am Nabil Tirmizi, Program Manager from AIBD, and today we are having another information-packed session on visual archives. In August, we did one webinar, which was well appreciated by you all. Thank you very much. It was all about the workflow, the workflow management, the strategies, some tools, some tricks, and some challenges even on the policy level. But today we are discussing about the ethical perspective. At times, we as content creators, when we are want to create any documentary or any news piece and we want to use any archival material, there are many concerns which we as content creators sometimes avoid, sometimes undervalue, and land into so many troubles. What are those troubles? We are definitely going to talk about, and we have a great lineup of speakers today. We have Mr. Hisashi Okajima, Director, National Film Archive of Japan. Mr. Jan Muller, Chief Executive Officer, National Film and Sound Archive of Australia. Mr. Ali Raza, Founder and Managing Director, Whiteway Systems from Singapore. And Mr. Adrian Wood, Coordinator, Restoration Asia. I thank you all of you to join us. All right, so I will start the session by having Mr. Adrian Muller. Let me just introduce him. Mr. Adrian Wood. Mr. Adrian Wood's connection with Asia began in 1990s, and he became a council member of SEAPAVAA. I will ask the abbreviation as well. The archive-based documentaries he has worked on have garnered numerous awards from Oscar to Peabody and Grayson Awards. He himself received BAFTA's Special Craft Award for his contribution to British television. Sir, I would like to ask you to unmute yourself and take over the stage. Over to you, Mr. Adrian Wood.
Thank you very much. Can everybody see me? Yes, I'm there. Once again, I'm talking into this void that always is very disconcerting. I'm sure I can see 4 faces at least, so I know there's 4 of us. And thank you all, everyone else out there, for joining us. As Mr. Nabil explained, this follows on from the discussion in August, where we were discussing some of the logistics relating to archival material. Certain things were raised, which was, for instance, colorization, and it led to a discussion about creating this session today. And so what I'd like to do is go through some of these things with a PowerPoint. Just for many people, they're obvious. For many people, they may be very new and different, but hopefully we can shed some light on all of them. So if we can go to the first slide, please. And let's first of all think about some of the technical issues. The first is aspect ratio, and the second thing is shooting speed. Can we go on a slide, please? One at a time. Yeah, no, can we go one slide at a time, please? Not, okay. So aspect ratio, since sound film began, has been established in a 4:3 aspect ratio, or 1:33. It's what broadcasters tended to use in the days of standard definition. Broadcasters moved to another aspect ratio, which is known often, if we change slide now, is 16:9. Now, if you take a 4:3 image and just simply crop it, you're losing an awful lot of content. And if we can change the slide, and if you stretch it, you distort the content massively. And so you need to think about how in a production you would deal with that. Do you put black pillar boxes at the side? Do you crop, but in a selective way, so you're using the content you need? It's an issue to think about. And if we can change the slide, please. As I said, speed is something that matters. The gentleman on the right was a US president 105 years ago. It was Woodrow Wilson. He complained whenever he went to a movie theater about seeing the speed that he appeared at because it was unnatural. And this was brought about by the fact that whilst you could control the speed of a camera by the cranking of a handle, it was up to a projectionist to choose the speed of projection. And if we go on one slide at a time, the camera had an option of shooting somewhere between 12 frames a second and 25 or 26 frames a second. And that was often the whim of the director, who wanted to use speed as a creative tool to make something more dramatic or more romantic, whatever. The director could tell the camera operator what speed to shoot at. But still, it was the issue of the projectionist, once the film had been finished, either following the procedures set down by the director or doing what the manager of the theater told him so that more films could be shown in a day. Today, if we go on a slide, we'll see that speed has changed many, many times. In the very first patent by Edison, the speed of the film was 46 frames a second. And if we move on, less than 10 years later, a color system was invented that used 32 frames per second. And we move on. Finally, there was a recognition in a couple of years that there were variable speeds for shooting. Not everything was the same. It was regularized by SEMPI at that point at 16 frames per second, or 90 feet of 35 mil per minute. Vitaphone, when it introduced sound, found that 24 frames per second was a better system. And 24 stayed as the shooting speed for film. So if ever you're dealing with sound film from any time from 1928 or 7 onwards, you were generally looking at 24 frames per second, but not everything was shot at that speed. Amateur speed was far different. And so when you use material that was shot at a different speed to the one of the production you're working with, you need to adjust the speed of the film so that action and activities in the image appear natural. And if we go on to the next slide. There are two other issues which are really important about the use of content. One, and for me it's the most important thing, especially working with documentaries on politics and history, is the factual accuracy of what you use and what you're using the story to tell. There's then an issue about the rights that people have within who appear in the film to their images. You may need, depending on the law of the country that you live in, you may need to obtain the permission of the person to use their image. And it doesn't have to be a famous person. It could be a person who is somebody's mother or somebody's child. You can't simply use an image necessarily, depending on the regulations in your country, without having a permission to do so. And you have to be very careful about what you say about those people. And there is then an issue about, if we go on a slide, please. The factual accuracy is something that was first discussed in publications in academia in the 1960s. It wasn't until 1976 rather, that this book was published, which discusses in detail the responsibilities of the historian about and its use of film as a form of historical evidence, but also talks about how broadcasters should consider repurposing material and reusing it for television. It was the first published acknowledgement in any major form whereby you can consider the importance of film as a piece of historical evidence. And an interesting section of it is available on the web, so you don't have to go looking for an almost 50-year-old book. You can read it online this afternoon or this evening. If we go on a second, okay. This is a title card for a film, which is a film from 1940, 1941. It was made by an American filmmaker. It was a travelogue that was sponsored by a tractor manufacturer in the US. And he paid for this filmmaker to travel around Asia, looking for places where his tractors had been sold. It was rather typical of its time in terms of what it addresses. It speaks about communities and people in a manner that unfortunately was the standard attitude in the 1930s, 40s, even 50s. I remember watching films as a kid at school, which were less than complimentary about people of other races, other nations. And so what I'd like to do is play a brief extract of this, which talks about Indigenous peoples in Australia, a community that has got specific protection and recognition today that it lacked at this time. The unfortunate thing for me, and we can discuss this in the broader discussion later, is that today in some places you can still buy material with no warning or caution about the content of it. In the film, if you look at it for it online, you'll very easily find it. It has material of many areas of Asia. It's got images of Hong Kong, images of Singapore, images of Indonesia, and is quite interesting in the historical content it illustrates. So if we could go back to the start of the clip, and after it, Jan Muller will talk about the specific issues of Indigenous peoples in Australia and far more, I'm sure. Thank you.
Finally, we came to where the farming country of the land near the ocean gives way to the barren desert that consists of 4/5 of the continent of Australia. Here, like hunted animals, live the most backward people of the world, the Australian Aborigines. The train stopped for water and an Australian soldier posed some of these savages for us. They never bathe in a lifetime, and though less civilized than any other people of the world, their instincts of hunting and nature are as keen as those of animals.
Right, so now I would like to invite Mr. Jan Muller to unmute his mic and take over the stage. Mr. Jan, over to you. Mr. Jan is also is Chief Executive Officer of National Film and Sound Archive of Australia. He is also a member of advisory board of the Center for Media History. And Mr. Muller is a highly experienced CEO and leader in the digital heritage and culture sector internationally. Mr. Jan, over to you.
Thank you, Nabil. Thank you. Could you please start the slides for me?
Yes. So this is your first slide, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One moment, please. I can see it myself as well. Yeah, there we are. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here again. And today I would like to talk about our indigenous collections and our relationships with our Aboriginal communities in Australia. As Adrian said, the specific situations of indigenous people in this country, in Australia, and how we, as the National Audiovisual Archive, work with them, which is completely different from, let's say, the traditional way of working as an archive. And I'll give you some examples of why that is the case. Next slide, please. I'll tell you the story about the Martu people, a community from the western desert from Australia, a huge area, actually 13.5 million hectares, twice the size of Tasmania, that island under Australia, or half the size of Malaysia, for example, or exactly the size of a country like Bangladesh. So it's a huge area. Next slide, please. Yeah, sorry again. Yeah, there we are. That's it. Thank you. The Martu people, the people we work with, the community we work with, are some of the last people who walked literally out of the desert into the world of non-Aboriginals, the world of immigrants in Australia. Their parents and their grandparents who lived in traditional lifestyle are actually still alive today. And their culture and language is super strong. It is their responsibility to keep that strong for future generations. Next slide, please. They call it the Pujiman days. The Pujiman days, actually, the period where they literally walked out of the desert and met with the white people for the first time in their lives. These Bushman days, as they also call it, actually is about the years in the generations in which they passed on their information, their knowledge, as they walked and traveled through the country. The world is formed by what they call Jukurpa. And Jukurpa is what we non-Aboriginals would call their dreaming. And it's actually more than that. Jukurpa created their worlds. It is their law and it can't change. And the ancestors who held this knowledge and passed it on to their elders, and their elders passed it on, this information to the young people, to the younger generations, to keep it safe for their kids, for future generations, generation on generation. Actually to indicate that family bonds are crucial and networks of families are crucial. KJ, the Kanjirpa Jukurpa, the organization that we work with, an organization that supports the Martu people to look after culture and country, are actually helping them with technology, with modern technology to keep their stories alive. The technology is used on Martu terms. Martu people decide how and when to use. And its use is always driven by cultural values and the aspirations and ambitions of the Martu people. Technologies to support and complement the Pujiman way, the traditional way of how knowledge was passed down. So what I would like to show you now is how different technologies are used by these Martu people to keep their stories alive, literally. Next slide, please. Yeah, one more slide, please. Oh, next slide. Yeah, no, sorry, one back. Yeah, the other one back, sorry, the people sitting on the ground.
This one.
No, it's one before, but it's okay. Yeah, there we are, that's the one. Film literally is the digital technology I would like to talk about. For Martu people, while many have heard the stories from their parents and grandparents, literally photos and films provide a rich visual pathway to their past. Film is something Martu have readily embraced. The Martu people direct which films, the KG people, the Organization for Culture and Country, which films they make and which films are distributed through the communities literally on hard disks and USB sticks. Next slide, please. I think you skipped one, Nabil. Yeah, and the next one, please.
This one.
No, the next. Yeah, there we are. Thank you. This is, no, one back, please.
I think my internet is being lagged, so that's why.
Yeah, but anyway. This is okay. This is the one. This is the one I was looking for. Yeah. This is a photo, or actually a part of a film, made by Peter Pincus, a native officer who came out to meet this group in 1964. This was the first time that people saw white people, that these people saw white people, 1964. The tape that contained this footage of this family group came into the country and was found in a rock, literally, in 1964, later. We took the film back to the Mardu people and preserved it for them. And actually, we found much more films than just this one. There was a rich archive of film material. There was, in these dry conditions, pretty well kept. And actually, telling the stories of these communities by filming and keeping the stories from ceremonies alive. And these ceremonies actually represent, it's a lot of dance actually, and these ceremonies represent the rich cultural life of these people whose traditional language is not necessarily spoken language, but in most cases the language of dance. So to have these films that portray these dances, keeping the stories alive of these communities are crucial, are very important. Next slide, please. So what you see here, the guy on the left is the same as the guy on the right. He was one of the boys that were filmed in the 1960s. And now he sees himself back on an iPad. That's how technology actually also enters these communities. But it's an interesting way to keep their stories and to tell the stories to their children and new generation. Next slide, please. To give you an example, this what you see here, this map is actually often how Aboriginals see their land. It's made up of how non-Aboriginals see their land. This is how white people, immigrants, describe the land. Waterways, roads, tracks, sand dunes. Next slide, please. But when Aboriginal people map their country, it is full of water holes. All these dots, there are water holes. Water holes play an important role in the social, cultural history of Aboriginal people. It is where they get their water, of course, but these are also places where they honor their ancestors, where they tell stories, and where they meet and conduct ceremonies. So every Martu waterhole has a name and form an important part of the history of this community, of the dreaming stories that I was talking about, and that are passed on from elders to younger generations. So these waterholes were placed on this map for the memories of the old people. And the map holds, for that reason, a lot of knowledge. Actually, it's a way to archive their memories. Next slide, please. And behind this map, which you can't see, are the songs and the stories that speak of their country. And everything is interlinked. Song lines, as they call them, song lines form a sort of tapestry covering the country, made up of interconnected poetry in different dialects and different languages. And song lines come from the ancestors who traveled from waterhole to waterhole. So that's actually, these waterholes represent the way they travel, the stories they were told, but also how these communities lived on from generation to generation. So it's crucial for these people to keep that sort of stories and that sort of information alive. So they mapped their waterholes. Next slide, please. And in order to do that, they used modern technologies, like, for example, helicopters, to see where these waterholes were and to keep the coordinates. Next slide, please. So this organization that we work with the Martu people, holds all the information about waterholes in a database. And this database is accessible by the Martu rangers who care for the country. This is their modern way of mapping these waterholes, but also mapping their stories. A beautiful project that they actually started recently is, with all these waterholes come the stories of the community members. And these stories are passed on from generation to generation. What they do is they record the stories, and link it literally to an interactive map of these waterholes, where you can listen to these stories. Per waterhole, there are more stories that they actually in this way keep for future generations. It's an interesting way to map, to link a map to stories and to culture. Next slide, please. And here you see an example. Here you see an example of how the rangers work with their maps, how they gather the stories from these elders, from these Aboriginal people. Next slide, please. The Mardu collection it's a small organization, but it's a huge collection. And as you can see, it consists of oral histories, of films, photos, artifacts, but also a lot of information about all these waterholes that they mapped. They don't have a database yet, or a collections management system for their collection. And that's a big problem, because many of their collection items remain inaccessible to the Martu people. And that's what we are changing, or at least try to change. Next slide, please. To make the collection available means that we need to think along the way these communities think and work. Rather than using the traditional ways of archiving and the traditional way of creating metadata. And when I say traditional, I mean our archival standards, our traditional way of archiving. It's better to understand that these communities actually work along the lines, as what I said before, along the lines of their family structures, their family networks. So if they use if they search for the right use of metadata, and if they search for the right metadata to add to the audiovisual content, what they do is actually, it's sort of crowdsourcing system. They invite people from their communities to look at the films, to look at the audiovisual content, the videos, and to listen to the oral histories, and try to come up with the names of the people that they see or hear. And given the fact that everyone is connected in these Aboriginal communities, it's easy for them to find out what the structure of this family network is, and what the names of the respective people in the videos or the films are. And that's their way to collect metadata, but also to keep their memories safe for future generations. It's another way of adding metadata to content than we do. Next slide, please. Here you see a picture of people from Alice Springs, people from the Strelo Research Center in Alice Springs, an Aboriginal research center in the heart of the country. Here they actually hand over their audio collection, or part of their audio collection. Next slide, please. A part of their audio collection, which consists, for example, of these things. Even wire is involved, a lot of tape material, cassettes. And actually, this collection is part of their oral history. It's where they recorded their ceremonies, their oral histories, and so on. And actually, they handed it over to us in order to help them to digitize their material. Next slide, please. And here you see the people in our studio listening to digitized parts of their collection. And the same happens here, actually, as when we worked with the Martu people. Next slide, please. You can see here at the right side, you can see one of the elders of this community drawing a map, literally. He's drawing a map, and actually this map represents a journey he once made, and he linked that to the content that he heard, oral histories, and music and dance. And he remembered exactly where he was when that was recorded. And his way to, again, to create this metadata that describes the material is totally different from how we would actually approach that sort of material and that sort of working. So this visual way of linking memories to places, to water holes, to sacred places, means that we need to understand that this is working with communities like this, working with Aboriginal communities, is actually based on trust. We need to understand that when they bring us their material, like what these people from the Strela Research Center do, bringing us their audio collections, that it's not about a physical carrier that they bring to us, but it's about their ancestors. They bring their culture to us. It's not a physical carrier, it's much more than that. It's spiritual. And one of the important things that we learned when we started to work with the Martu people and these people from Alice Springs was that this material is not only sacred material and restricted in the way how many people can handle it, but it's also either men's material or women's material. The elders in the community, they decide whether it's men's business or women's business. Men's business means that only men can touch it and only men can work it, and women's business the same. Only women can work with it, which means that we needed to form two separate teams, a men's team and a women's team, in order to match with their expectations about who is doing what and who is working with whom. It's an interesting way to deal with that culture. And in this slide, the last slide of my presentation, you see indeed how we keep that restricted material safe in our vaults. It's locked, as you can see, and it can only be touched by only a few people in our organization and a few people in their organization. It's totally different from archiving in the traditional archivist way, but it's crucial to understand that this is about trust. It's about understanding these people, and it's about respecting their ways to deal with their ancestors, which in this case is actually an audiovisual collection. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Adrian, can you unmute yourself?
I'm back. If you can go back to the PowerPoint. Two of the hurdles to program making, especially using historical content, is the cost of using content. It doesn't always come free. And there are many cases when a filmmaker or program maker, even a broadcaster, wants to produce a documentary on a person's history or a nation's history, and the material is not within that nation. It's in a third party's collection, maybe in a place that's inaccessible, but it costs money which is not affordable in your budget. And so it is necessary to try and find solutions. If we go to the next slide, please. There are different things to consider. One is copyright. What is the term of copyright of material? The fact that someone has it doesn't mean copyright still exists in it. Material might be in the hands of one person, but the copyright is in the hands of someone else. You would then, if you're going to avoid breach of copyright, have to pay the copyright holder and also a fee to access to a commercial entity or a non-commercial entity that has the material. And those are things that may mean some material is completely unaffordable. I'm currently working on a project where we face that very problem. And it's a subject matter that is very close to my heart and this discussion, and it's about the importance of archives and archivists in the preservation of history. Some organizations, both commercial and non-commercial, want to charge fees that are wholly disproportionate to the value of those materials in a relatively low budget production, which means that editorial decisions are taken which aren't necessarily for the best of the production, but to make it affordable. And the final thing to consider is if you have a very limited budget, but there is material that is accessible, there's such a thing as public domain content. Traditionally, it's a concept that originates from the United States, where the material is accessible, that was generated by the American government or was gifted to the American government on behalf of the American people. And there is material within those collections that comes from the whole world. There's material from Africa, from South America, material that was generated by the government, the US government in Southeast Asia and other parts of Asia. There's material in the Pacific Islands and territories. And so the fact that something isn't within collections in your own country doesn't mean it's not within a collection elsewhere, and it doesn't mean that you can't find something which is very affordable because it's sitting in an American government collection where, other than the cost of duplication and delivery, there is no charge over and above that. If we could go to the next slide. And then another key issue is modification of content. You know, if you are using historical content, what can you do with it? How can you manipulate it? Can you digitally merge images from one source into another? Can you fake history by doing that? And then there is the more contentious issue that we touched on in our webinar last in August. And if we could change slide, please. Colorization, is that just a polite term for modification? We are in a situation where people have started using colorization because it makes black and white material to many people more accessible. It generates interest in history that perhaps wouldn't be there with a young generation in black and white content. But what are the risks of colorization? How do you colorize and retain accuracy and keep ethics within the work you're doing? Are you obliged to reveal to an audience that this isn't color material as originally created? This is material where color has been added for the audience. And there are institutions now who, if you obtain content from them, oblige you to inform the audience that this has been colorized. And it's a very healthy policy to my mind. In principle, I don't have an objection to anything that's done with historical content, as long as there is transparency for the people who watch the product that you've created. And if we could go on to the next slide, please. This is a black and white image that is from a shrine near to my home in Fukuoka in Japan. And I thought I'd find a website where you can upload a black and white image and you'll get a colorized version of it. And if we can go one slide at a time, please. And this is the result I got. There are numerous websites who offer this service. They don't charge for it. It's done by AI. And, you know, it's not a displeasing effect. And if I were to be making a documentary and I use the image on the right, well, I wouldn't feel ashamed by it. It wouldn't be too bad. But then if we actually look at the next slide, you will see that that's the actual color. What I did was take a color image, remove the color from it, put it into the service offered on the web. And this is the difference between reality and AI. And there is another slide to go to. Sushi is something that is often on a table in Japan. Many images, and I repeated the process. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see the rendition. Now, well, the stuff on the right isn't too bad, but I certainly wouldn't be wanting to put anything on the bottom left in my mouth. And again, if we go to the next slide, you see that this is how AI from a different provider has totally misinterpreted the shades of gray within the image. The yellow flower has become red, the green leaf has become autumnal, which at this time of year isn't bad. But the sushi on the left seems far more edible. And I, at that point, would like to hand over to Hisashi if he's with us. And yes, I think Hisashi's there. Yes, welcome back. I'm sorry to use a sushi analogy, Hisashi. But I know it's something close to both of our hearts.
All right. So, Mr. Hisashi is Director of National Film Archive of Japan and was previously the Chief Curator of National Film Center, the National Museum of Modern Art, Tokyo. Mr. Hisashi served as the 12th President of the International Federation of Film Archives between 2009 and 2011. Mr. Hisashi, over to you.
Thank you, Nabil. I was shocked by the green sushi. It was look horrible and no appetite now. Well, my attitude to colorization is the artificial coloring to the originally black and white film by using the videogram technology and now digital technology. But my attitude to colorization is very simple. I do not like it. Although I like the many people who like colorization, but simply I don't like the colorization. I never do it, and hopefully don't want to be involved in any deed of arbitrary computer coloring at all. Also, I do not like the sonorization, which is the technique rather frequently used in the television programs for years, giving various kinds of the sound effects, sometimes an artificial voice that was totally not in the original silent film. Why I hate them is, again, very simple. They change the original, alter the content of the film, thus they can even change the history of cinema and even the history itself. We have quite a long record of discussions on this theme of the colorization since the related technology started in the 1980s in US and Canada and some other countries. Then, and in the mid-80s, there were the many arguments, particularly among the Hollywood producers and directors. There were really the lively discussions, including that of expressing the plain hatred toward the then new technology, brand new technology. For example, the director Billy Wilder wrote on September 1st in 1986 for the Los Angeles Times, quote, "Those fools do they really think that colonization will make the informer any better, or Citizen Kane or Casablanca? Or do they hope to palm off some of the old stinkers by dipping them in 31 flavors? Is there no end to their greed? Quote, unquote. Of course, there were a certain amount of people who liked the colonizations other than the active propulsion clique and the naive new tech lovers. For instance, in the 1984, Cary Grant, who knew his film, The Topper, in 1937, was to be colorized, welcomed it to say, quote, "I found the process extremely interesting and trust your company." This is Earl Glick's Colorization Incorporated, will continue to color other memorable films in the same manner, unquote. The good summary of all these stimulative but sometimes boring discussions were described in the chapter 9 of the very famous book, famous for the film archivist, the chapter of the Colorization, in the book Nitrate, Wont, Film Preservations in the United States, written by Anthony Slide, written in 1992. And we all know that all these arguments consequently did lead to the legislations of the National Film Preservation Act and the National Film Registry in the US, which were in long term very effective for the complete preservations of the selected important films in the US. It is by all means a clever scheme also from the public film archive point of view. The law indicates that if any alteration, colorization, shortening, or harsh cutting, or whatever have you, is made for the film on the list of the National Film Registry, the producer of the new version must clearly note what he has done on the film or he materially altered, and that the original creative decision is not connected with the version at all. In other words, it clarifies the disclaimer by the creators to the version. Paul Spear, my friend, former head of the film department of the MBRS divisions of the Library of Congress, who came to Japan, who passed away last December, once said in Tokyo that this National Film Registry scheme is much influenced by the Japan's national treasure system, in Japanese, kokuho seido, kokuho. Ironically, in Japan, there's this scheme has not been adopted to the motion picture film, excepting for several examples of the films made in the Meiji period. In fact, well, I am a worshipper of or follower of the Eileen Baza, who also passed away last year. She said, quote, "Our chief goal in film restoration is to try and get as close as we can to what the audience saw on opening night. I don't think we have any interest in what might be popular. I think that belongs more to the commercial world than the world of archives. In other words, we have the interest of a film historian to try the best we can to recreate that original experience. Although, of course, we are not the same audience at all, and we know that," unquote. So you can see me on this screen as a very old-fashioned, traditionally stubborn, and rather say radically conservative film archivist who drafted an ethical document called the FIAF 70th Anniversary Manifesto, adopted in Paris in 2008, which you'll see on the FIAF website. It explains several crucial reasons why we don't abandon the motion picture film in this fast-changing and never-stopping world of digital age. The fourth point of the reason, there's many reasons, but the fourth point of the reason why we don't throw film away is, quote, the film elements held in archive vaults are the original materials from which all copies are derived. One can determine from them whether a copy is complete or not. The more digital technology is developed, the easier it will be to change or even arbitrarily alter content. Unjustified alteration or unfair distortion, however, can always be detected by comparison with the original film, provided it has been properly stored, unquote. However, I must say, one of the several hidden elements behind this fourth point of the reason is that we would possibly experience the distortion of history by the deed of the digitally distorting the film, which would be easily done by someone who has a distorted idea or any ugly political ambition, for example, and we should prepare for it. But probably it would be difficult to stop it because the access to the film archive will become more and more easily, more and more expected. And on the other hand, changing the content of the copied film from the public film archive collection will be easier day by day, along with the fact that the digital technology keeps advancing. Virtually, we can't stop it. And what we can only do is at least keep films as a source of historical facts and historical artifacts in the true sense of the meaning. Colorization seems one of the serious blasphemies, sorry for using this term, but I don't know any milder ones, against the deed of the people who not only who created the film, but also who saw it when it, oh, sorry. When it first comes to the movie house. So, yeah. I, however, understand, for example, what Jan Mueller said in the FIAF Congress. He is always seriously concerned about the films in the collection, which are not used for several 50 years, 60 years, no chance to see. So colorization is very good tool to diffuse the cultural set kept in the film archive. And the film archive is, as we all know, that's the subsidized, in many cases, subsidized by the public money and tax money. So we cannot virtually refuse the any access to the collections. The hate, I don't like colonization, but this hate cannot stop the freedom of access and usage of a collection kept in the public film archive. And also people started to use the term creative reuse. Creative reuse is a very strong term, and film archivists cannot overcome on this usage of the term, particularly when the film is in a public domain. Colonization is a commercially right thing, I believe, and even necessary, both for the users and the archives, archive management people in particular, but at the same time, it is a wrong thing, culturally, historically, and aesthetically. Well, thanks to the Adrians, I found the, this is the book by Anthony Slide. So, oh, this is the reverse side. Anyhow, that's the, thanks to the Adrians, I found this document of the Imperial War Museums, the policy on the colorizations of the original black and white film and the photographs for licensing for use in commercial projects. This is a very well thought document. And for example, it says the request for Imperial War Museum permission will be considered according to the following guidelines. 1, material must not be misrepresented. The viewer, reader must clearly be aware that they are looking at an artistic rendition of the original black and white materials. Number 2, IWM permission to colorize does not include any endorsement for the historical accuracy of the colorization. Number 3, Imperial War Museum would require specific credit acknowledging that the material shown in an artistic renditions of the original black and white material. For example, you can see this. Sorry, I didn't prepare any. Oh, this is again. Well, anyway, there's the credits, the copyright, IWM, artistic rendition, and the year, or film, colorized footage, artistic rendition, year, original black and white film, copyright, Imperial War Museum. This is very, very clear and clever examples for the colonization issues. So that's my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hisashi. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Syed Ali Raza. Let me just introduce him. Mr. Ali Raza is founder and managing director of Whiteway Systems, Singapore. He's a thought leader and visionary. His company's Whiteway is a leading systems integration company focused on providing solutions to broadcast houses. Mr. Ali Raza, I would like you to unmute your microphone and.
Yeah, thank you, Nabil. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be on this board. Right, so I have a few things to say. Number one, last August, when we did the previous seminar, we had a discussion, we had a short presentation on color correction. So first of all, let me explain in what context that was done. The context at that time was that we were mainly talking about content that was preserved on magnetic media. And when we tried to bring the magnetic media content into the digital format, we noticed that there was a lot of color distortion. It was a colored film, it was not a black and white video, it was a color video. And there was a lot of distortion and there was a lot of color bleeding and there was a lot of, the color was changing from frame to frame. In one frame, it was like a character was wearing a green shirt and it became purple, then in the next frame it became blue, etc. So the owner of the content at that time, in the project that we did, decided that, I mean, the video was not in a suitable shape to be shown to viewers, so they decided to go for color correction, not colorization. Second thing is that yes, I agree with all with Mr. Okajima and with Jan Muller, and on the fact that if it's a historical black and white film, it cannot be and should not be changed. If the aspect ratio is 4:3, keep the aspect ratio at 4:3. Don't even change the aspect ratio. keep the original film as it is. Secondly, second point was in the previous conversations was that there is a film that was made by a black and white film that was made a long time ago by, let's say, a Charlie Chaplin film or a historical film made by, you know, some creative director. So we should absolutely keep the original film as close to the original as possible without changing anything. And taking a historical film and colorizing it doesn't really make sense. I mean, I don't know why people do it, and they should not do it, definitely. Thirdly, Jan, thanks for giving us a really great presentation on how you guys are preserving the ancient culture and this thing. So I have an interesting view on that. There are a number of old ancient cultures that are disappearing. I think almost every country has some language, music, poetry, song, dance that is disappearing. In fact, I read recently came across a news report where they said that in Northeast India in Assam, there was a singer, an old lady, who was one of the last speakers of a language that has disappeared. And after she died, there'll be no more of, that language completely disappears. So it's very sad that an entire language, an entire culture is disappearing. And fortunately, a few videographers went there and they captured her singing a song, the old lady singing a song in that language. And after that, she passed away, and that whole language, whole culture died with her. So it's very sad, and we need to, keep an archive of all the older cultures, languages, song, dance, music, poetry, as much as possible. There's no replacement to it, and colorization is not going to help in any way. I mean, it doesn't make sense to colorize. Similarly, not just colorization, but also if you have an artist who's singing a song or making a brilliant piece of music, even that cannot be touched in any way. I mean, the original sound has to be preserved as much as possible, and we cannot and should not be allowed to change any part of the sound or the picture in any way possible. Having said, I mean, I think everybody will agree to this. There's no question about it. But the point is that with the furiously advancing digital technology, you do take an image or you do take a sound and you store it in a particular file format. And when you change the file format, you are making some alterations to it. It's not the original sound or it's not the original picture. I mean, you may not be coloring it, but the resolution of the picture or the aspect ratio or some elements of the picture is changing. I mean, we cannot ignore that. But it's necessary. Otherwise, if you just keep it on film and the film gets destroyed, or if you have it on a magnetic tape and the magnetic tape loses its magnetic quality, then that entire picture is gone. So it is a necessity that has to be done. But as we advance, as the picture gets older, then sooner or later you need to upgrade to some other new format. And I think, maybe 15, 20 years, you need to keep upgrading to a new format or to a new file system, which is, in use at that time. And whenever you make a change, there is a change in the picture that you do. So that is, I believe, unavoidable. And what I'd like to say is that if an international body can lay down the ground rules, or if the international body can lay down the guidelines on how the originals can be preserved as much as possible to their the main video or photo or sound, then I think that will help everybody all over the world. Because I think there's no question that everybody agrees that the original should be kept as much as possible. The second aspect is that sometimes when you take a video from a film and put it in digital, then the copy made is, I mean, I think every archivist has faced this problem, that when you make a digital copy, then they face some problems with it, like lip sync or jitter in the picture or something like that. So, I mean, we need to try to keep the picture as much as possible in the original, but sometimes when you face this issue, then you have to, then there's no choice at that time but to use digital tools to straighten the picture, or to at least strengthen the picture. So it's an ethical dilemma. I mean, what do? You can't leave the picture as it is with the jitter or with the lip sync, but you got to correct it and the only way to correct it is by using digital tools. But I believe that is necessary. But then again, we go back to the same point that we should preserve the original film also for as long as possible. I mean, it's not possible to preserve it for ever and ever, but for as long as possible, so that we can have access to the original film again and again to convert it in a proper digital format. Third issue that was raised was that, yeah, people will make pictures of the original film or original picture or even sound, and then they can twist it, they can turn it, with nowadays we have an even bigger problem of deep fakes. So yeah, those problems will be there, but one issue that we discussed in the last seminar was that how do we watermark it, or how do we put some technology, ring fence it with the picture or the video with some technology, so that I mean, the digital alteration is not possible. So we also explored to some extent, to say that if you remove the watermark, then it will appear as that this is not really the original picture, whereas the picture with the watermark will appear that this is the original picture. I mean, or a close copy to the original picture. So something like that should be done, so that when the viewer sees the video or sees the picture, then he knows that, yeah, this is really the original, or this is not the original and it could have been doctored. So there's a clear difference between him seeing a real original picture copy versus seeing a doctored copy. So something like that. I think some technologies are coming out with. So just as new technologies are coming out to distort the picture or to produce deep fakes or to colorize it and etc. At the same time, technologies are coming out to preserve to ring fence the original picture so that it cannot be changed. Yeah, so lots and lots of issues, and I don't think. I mean, I would like to thank AIBD for bringing this issue up, because it's an issue of great importance. And I think we should have a robust debate on this, and we should keep discussing as the world changes around us, so that the next generation of archivists can understand the arguments to and fro, for and against colorization, and come to their own conclusions and make sure that our history and our legacy is preserved as much as possible for the future generations to come. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Now I would like to invite Mr. Adrian Wood. Now we are moving towards our second, and Adrian Wood will be the moderator of this session. Over to you, Mr. Adrian.
Thank you very much, Nabil, and thank you, Mr. Aliraza, for your comments, and also Hisashi, who clarified very precisely a serious position to have on colorization. And what I think it does is differentiate clearly between the role of an archivist, whether the archivist is in a film archive or in a broadcast archive, from the role of a producer and filmmakers who I fall into the latter camp more than anything. But personally, I've always advocated transparency in whatever I've done, whether it's in production or whether it's in restoration. And as Mr. Ali Raza speaks about, one of the problems is the terminology, because there's a huge difference between color correction and colorization, entirely different topics. And it's because the carrier often fades. There's a propensity for material, especially Kodak print stock from the 1950s, to fade completely to magenta, 50s, 60s. The negatives fortunately don't, but you have to have access to the negative to be able to recover normal balanced color from it. I've got many things to say. I think the key is the separation between archivists in every corner of the world and production personnel. They're very different. I think it's important that we remember that colorization was commercially adopted by Pathé in around 1910, when they started painting on film in a factory in Paris. And so you will find color materials going back over 100 years, which were hand painted by groups of women working almost slave-like in a Paris factory. But there were people dabbling with color film systems as early as 1906. There was a commercial exploitation of a color system in 1910 that recorded remarkable scenes in India. It was an obsession of mine that I have the misfortune perhaps of realizing that you could make a documentary using original color material to give an overview of a subject. It couldn't be complete because not everything was filmed in color, but where color film, real color film existed, you could tell a modern audience a story, and perhaps it would be, as people say and defend colorization, it makes history more accessible. And what I'd like to do before we go into the general discussion is show an extract from a documentary that was made almost 20 years ago now, which looks at the terrible period of the partition of India and the impact it had on ordinary people. And so if you could play that video, and after that we'll go, which lasts for about just over 4 minutes. So after that we'll go to the broad discussion. Thank you, Nabil.
On the eve of independence, Nehru addresses the people of India.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
The 15th of August, 1947, the British Empire in India has come to an end. The last Viceroy, Louis Mountbatten.
The flag raising and the salute were done amid scenes of the most fantastic rejoicing. And as the flag broke, a brilliant rainbow appeared in the sky, which was taken by the crowd as a good omen.
Qasim Muhammad.
On the 15th of August came freedom. The freedom to burn, loot and murder. While Delhi and Karachi were celebrating, central Punjab was burning.
Between August 1947 and March 1948, 4.5 million Hindus and Sikhs are forced to migrate from Pakistan to India. 6 million Muslims must move in the opposite direction. Britons and Indians witnessed the bloodshed. Shahid Ahmed.
It is a battleground. People have gone mad. Trains to Pakistan are being looted and occupants slaughtered. We all knew that carnage was in the offing. So did Mountbatten. The British Empire, which tried to build India over centuries, can never live down this great tragedy.
Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Boyd Hudson.
The sight from the air was awe-inspiring. In this chaos, millions of refugees were struggling to get to India or Pakistan. Thousands of others were doing their best to prevent them, murdering them by the hundred. But death is nothing. There are things more terrible than death.
The worst atrocities are in the newly divided Punjab. Fleeing refugees are terrified that their women will be raped. Gurmeet Singh.
We felt totally helpless. We were completely surrounded. We had no weapons. We took the decision that all the women, our own family, must be killed. First, we killed the young girls with our own hands. Kerosene was poured over them, and they were set on fire. Women and children, where could they have gone?
Kulwant Singh.
My mother saw my father being killed. They cut him up into 100 pieces. I was trembling. At my feet, there were many bodies. There were fires all around. And then they threw the children into the fire. My mother, she hid me by my father's body.
"10 million people are displaced in the partition of India. 1 million are dead."
The images are very harrowing. The way that the filmmakers I worked with made them even more harrowing by the use of letters and writings from diaries at the time and the use of music. But none of that material was colorized. None of it came from India. None of it came from Pakistan. It was sitting unwatched and unseen previously in the Imperial War Museum in London. It wasn't necessary to colorize because color film was there to tell that tragic story. And it's why we made a point of using color film that was really color film, and always will. I'll always be transparent about where film is in color, where it is not. The problem comes, and we should talk about it generally, not just me speaking about it, but in a creative level, if you have material that is crucial to tell a story that is black and white, but you want to integrate it into something that is color, then is it legitimate in that case with transparency to colorize it? I have no objection whatsoever, as long as people know what you're doing. So we should talk about that and any other questions or points that we collectively have got, and anything that maybe the audience who are with us have got. I've got one point to make about the permanency of carriers and the positions, formal positions of the community. No carrier, no matter what you do with it, will last forever. But you should try and preserve it, I think, for as long as ever. There are organizations, FIAF is one, Fiat IFTA is another. Their Congress next week is being live streamed and is freely accessible to anybody who wants to join. the Fiat IFTA Congress, and details are on, and registration is available on their website. The Image Permanence Institute in Rochester in New York has done a lot about the analysis of what are best practices for the preservation of carriers. And again, that's a place that I would recommend people looking for information. IPI.org, I believe, is the website, but I'm sure Nabil and AIBD can share that information with everybody. So please contribute. I feel as though I've spoken too much.
Yeah, hi. Lovely film. I watched this film before, and every time I watch it makes me, I mean, it's an amazing, really fantastic film that you showed. Thank you for that. So yeah, to your other point that there's a lot of regulation that needs to be informed, and a lot of people need to be educated so that they understand how to do archiving properly and not make the huge amount of mistakes that have been made by other people who are not so well informed. So I think AIBD is doing a fantastic job by bringing up all these issues and questions in front of a wider audience, and by addressing as much of these issues as possible. And Adrian, thank you for bringing, giving us a lot of the answers that we were looking for, and we hope that you'll continue to give us all the answers.
I wished I had answers. I have information, and I know a lot of people, but that doesn't mean I have answers. And I'm very pleased and honoured that Jan and Hisashi are with us today, because they know far more than I and have far greater awareness of many things. I learn from them. We all learn from each other, but it's a collective, and there's a community that shares information.
So Jan's work seems to be very amazing. I mean, really. So Jan must share a little bit more about his experiences, I think.
Yeah, I would like to share something about colorization, actually, and it was brought up already briefly by Hashishi in terms of my presentation in Switzerland last year in Lausanne for the FIAF conference, where I showed some results of colorized material that we made for SBS, the public broadcaster in Australia. And SBS actually, they made a television series called Australia in Color. And about, I think 50% of that content came from our archive, was restored, digitized in some cases even first, restored as well, and colorized with a company in Paris. And actually, the technique we used was the same technique that was used by the film director, a famous film director, Peter Jackson, who made a First World War documentary called They Shall Not Grow Old. I think it was 2018, just before we started to work on this, which was actually also a transformation of traditional monochrome footage into color images. And like what happened with that documentary, They Shall Not Grow Old, Australia in Color became a very popular television show in Australia. And my idea has always been that archives should be shared, and archives should be open, should be shared as much as possible. If it works through productions like this, in collaboration with a broadcaster that wants to open up new audiences and reach new audiences, and that's what happened actually. But even more importantly, bring a new sort of, shed a new sort of light to historic events. And we saw in that first clip that Adrian showed, we saw a fragment of, I think it was a newsreel or a part of a documentary where people were talking about Aboriginal people in Australia. And he said something like, they are less civilized than any other people on Earth. Well, if you've seen my presentation before, about Aboriginal cultures and how they work with their archives, how they work with their culture, how they use innovation and technology, but more importantly, how they succeed in keeping these stories alive. I would say, I think they are more civilized than any other people in the world. It's the oldest culture anyway. So in order to correct these sort of ideas and concepts in a country, if that can be done by addressing these topics with a sort of material that appeals to new audiences and younger audiences, because it is colorized and more vivid, and people start to literally talk and think and feel about these topics, I think it's a good job actually. Nevertheless, and that's what I said in Switzerland in that presentation as well, I understand and respect the original work. We will never adjust the material in a way that it will be changed forever. So the digital copies that were made of the original black and white material, the original black and white material is still in the archive. We still have it. It hasn't changed. And that's an interesting one, Ali Raza, that you just talked about in terms of how to make sure that we understand that we're still dealing with the original in times of deep fake and artificial intelligence and so on. It's a crucial thing. So on that note, we started a project with the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in Australia around blockchain. Blockchain is a way to actually follow what happens with an original. It's a sort of digital fingerprint that you put on it. And what you can do with blockchain, and again, we're just testing it as we speak. And I think it's an interesting technology. With blockchain, you can fingerprint your material. You know exactly what happens with the digital file as soon as you take it out of your digital storage in order to lend it to someone, to broadcast it, to adjust it, to colorize it. Whatever happens with that file, everything is marked. We know exactly what happens in every stage, even who used it and who took it out of the digital storage. It's a way to protect the original in a modern, innovative way. And I think given the fact that archives will grow and more content will become available digitally, we all know that the world will be flooded by digital content, already is flooded by digital content. And that digital storage is a huge issue for archives, but for the world in general, I think. It makes sense to be aware of the role of an archive that is all about trust and trustworthiness, because we are the protectors of these originals. Even when material is colorized, it's still about the original because that tells the real story. So actually, just a long way to say, innovation and technology can help us. It can help us reach new audiences. For example, with this Australia in Color series, it helps to tell the original Australian story. And don't forget, the history of modern Australia is literally runs parallel to the history of motion pictures. It's a very young country. The first bits of footage in Australia include a clip of a guy with a cigar, smoking a cigar on roller skates in Sydney. It's material made by the Lumiere brothers, who were in Australia and produced their first films here. It's seen as one of the oldest films in the world. So the industry started here in Australia. The history and the development of the country actually run parallel to the development of the film industry, and that's an interesting thing. So where everyone just exactly when black and white film developed into a more public-oriented medium, the country was aware of black and white material and didn't know about the real stories behind it. When we started to colorize, we found out that people who were never interested in history suddenly became interested in the story of this country. And SBS, the broadcaster, who's a big advocate for Aboriginal rights in Australia, managed to tell that story of Aboriginal people in the right way. Even when it was done by colorized material, the fact that it attracted an audience that they would never have reached if it would have been a traditional traditional black and white documentary, was an important insight for them. So if we can help people understand their history a bit better of the country and can help to shed another light on specific and difficult topics in a country just by using colorized material, and it worked that way, I'm fine with it. As long as an archive, and back to the archival role, as long as the archive still keeps the original and makes sure that it's a protected copy or a protected original that won't be changed. I think it's an interesting discussion. And it's indeed what Adrian said. I think there's a difference between broadcast archives and film archives, for sure. I come from a broadcast archive in the Netherlands and work for a mostly film archive in Australia now. I see the differences. I see the ways people opinionate about this and how they differ in their opinions. But at the end of the day, I think whatever sort of archive it is about sharing your material. It is about telling stories with your archive that can be done in very, very different ways. Innovation, technology, digital helps us to reach our audiences more than ever. But at the end of the day, it's still the trustworthy source that an archive is, and it actually makes us unique compared to big digital warehouses like Google and Amazon that host a lot of content that is in our archives as well, but that will never be a trustworthy source because it's a commercial operation. When they decide that they want to get rid of parts of their, not even collections, but part of their video databases, they will decide without letting anyone know. So the trustworthy role of an archive, the trust role of an archive is a crucial one. We should never change things. It happened recently in America, actually, where the National Archive, for the sake of an exhibition in Washington, actually changed a picture of a demonstration after Trump's election in 2016, where people were holding protest boards with texts that were not very nice for Mr. Trump, and they blurred it. The National Archive of America blurred a few of these texts in order to use it in their communication around that specific exhibition. An archivist saw that and actually published that, and the National Archives had to give their apologies to the world, actually, that they changed history. They blurred some of the text on these boards and pretended that it was not that bad as it was in these days. All to say that the only role for an archive is to be the trustworthy protector of national stories in national archives. And I think that even when you colorize material or use technologies or like blockchain to fingerprint and to follow the material, that will never change. That's the most crucial part of our work.
So sorry. Go ahead.
No. I wondered if Sushi had got anything to add at this point.
No, there's no special things to add, but I must say some tricky things is that the black and white films is a kind of color films. Black and white films has many colors indeed, in fact. And the bad thing is that now, particularly the young generations, students, don't know the real beauty of the black and white films. And they cannot be distinctive to the real beauty of the 35mm black and white film from the videogram black and white film. So, for example, we have the several prints of the 35mm films. When the film is very, very popular or very, very important, we every 10 years make the new prints. And for example, when we have the Kurosawa's Sanjuro in 1962, we have the almost original print viewing copies made in 1970 or something. And also we have the prints of the 1980s. And also we have the prints of 93 or something. They are all the same film, the same prints, but the black and white is different. Color of the black and white film is always different and changes very rapidly in the last 30 years. So, for example, there was the Professor Stephen Betsy. He wrote in the Archive Zones Journal in London that he writes something like, it is important to teach the young generation how the authentic black and white film is beautiful, together with the explanations of the reason of the beauty. He writes it that way. But who teaches? That's the real beauty of the black and white films. That is, I think, part of the jobs must be done by the film archive. We have the great prints, so that's why we can teach the real beauty of black and white films. And then we can go to any kind of colorized films or kind of same thing, you know. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I remember I had the, I was going to say privilege, and I think it was a privilege to take a 1912 camera negative and scan it in 4K. And I was shocked by the inherent quality of the image and the resolution within the image from an emulsion that was more than 100 years old at that point. And everyone who has seen it since then has been shocked by the visual resolution there is. And there was no artificial intelligence being used. It was simply the quality of the lens that was on the camera, the quality of the emulsion on the film, the quality of the lab that processed the film in 1912, and the guardianship a succession of archivists took in that material in the ensuing century. I was just the lucky one that had the option to put it on ask someone to put it on a scanner, scan it, and show me the result, and then put it back to film and see it on a screen. And it's remarkable, the inherent beauty within a print from, or a negative and a print from 1912 and a copy that can be seen today. Because there is a beauty in black and white. There is a different beauty in color. I think there just needs to be a transparency between the work we do and how we do it and how we present it, so that no one is misled. And for me, that's the key thing. I don't know, is anybody, Nabil, in the audience want to join us and ask any questions?
Yes, there is a question by Ms. Teresa. I think she is from BON. What are the measures an organization should take to protect copyrights in the digital environment? This is the first question. After that, I can...
Okay. Well, I think since ever there was a VHS tape deck created or a Betamax deck created, there's been an issue with piracy. The protection of copyright in the digital domain is a complete nightmare, because there are so many people who would record something from a feed on a satellite, on a cable, who don't respect the intellectual property of filmmakers and producers, and put it onto YouTube. The audience, I think, is more than happy to watch YouTube quality on an iPhone. Jan mentioned watermarking and blockchain tracking. Ali Raza mentioned watermarking. I think content owners can take steps, and you can then complain about the exploitation, but stopping it and protecting it, I think, is a nightmare. And I don't know if anybody else, Jan or Aliraza, any thoughts on that? And
yeah,
the question.
So this is a perennial, as you mentioned, it's a perennial problem. And I think there's no 100% method of stopping piracy in any way possible. In fact, nowadays, when a film is going to be released, it's already can be found online somewhere, in the darknet or something like that. We have seen, one of the filmmakers was telling me that he made a film and it was yet to go in a cinema, to be released in cinema, and it was already on the internet. That's the level of piracy that we can see. So is there a 100% way? The answer is no. There's no 100% way. Is there a method to stop the video from being pirated? Yeah. I mean, DRM, the other thing that I forgot to mention was digital rights management systems. There are several of them, mostly from Hollywood. They have the ability to encrypt the content and then play it from only a few servers in the cinema where the decryption system is there. So that protects the content to some extent. But if there's somebody in the audience inside the movie hall and he's making another film of your film being shown on the silver screen, you can't stop it. I mean, I don't see how you can stop it. But digital rights management systems did take off a few years ago. I mean, maybe 1 decade ago, 10 years ago, something. But they didn't really become very popular because they cost an arm and a leg. And majority of the people could not afford to buy those systems. So other than watermarking and the DRM, I would like to hear from Jan about the blockchain system. I mean, that's something that is very interesting.
Yeah, it's one of the ways to protect the material and to be able to trace what happens. I just try to explain how it works. It's actually a digital fingerprint that is added to the original file, digital file in this way. But the question is about the digital environment. So it could work. It is a way to protect your material and to know exactly what happens with the material. And again, it's not just what happened after it's been taken from the archive or any organization's file. It's even about who browsed through it, who researched it, who added metadata to it, and what metadata. Every step, every time this specific file is in a way used, it's traceable, and it allows us to see what happens with that file. And also from a copyright perspective, you could easily add the copyright situation to that specific file in order to protect it and to trace it. So as soon as it's used somewhere outside of the archive and it's done in an illegal way, you can easily, through that blockchain technology, trace it and see what happened and even see who did it. It's still early days. It's not a viable solution yet, but it will be a solution in the coming years, I'm sure. And blockchain is used in many ways, especially in the finance world, in banking, just to trace money, for example. But the technology can work for us and can work in order to make sure what happens with the content and the copyright. For an archive, the copyright issue in itself in the digital environment is also to be able and to understand who the original makers are or the rights owners are, especially since an archive is more dealing with the issue, how can we make sure that we can share the material, especially when it's public material, with as many users, researchers, filmmakers, creative industries, audiences as possible. So there's another question for an archive behind that copyright issue versus a commercial media operation organization where it's just about making money with the content and protecting the copyright from abuse by others, like the example we just heard about. Yeah, indeed, everything that's been published is on the internet within 10 minutes probably. But in order to protect this as much as possible, but also in order to make sure that you're given the copyright situation, that you will be able to use it in as many ways as possible to just make it public and to make sure that people know what's in the archive is a crucial thing. So again, in the digital environment, techniques like blockchain will work, but also digital rights management systems nowadays are pretty innovative already in order to trace and protect the copyrights of specific files.
All right. Thank you very much. So we have another question by Anupam Yadav. But before that, I am quite pleased to announce that today we are being joined by more than 36 different organizations from 16 different countries. So there are many research fellows, many producers, archive head of archive departments. So if they want to share any comment or any of their case study on the grid, they are more than welcome. They can just raise their hand and we will just allow them on the grid to let them speak their case study. So Mr. Anupam Yadav, he's a producer. His question is, what are the basic visual archives ethics for a public broadcaster during COVID-19 pandemic? Anyone?
I think everybody's struggling with this period of our histories. I know many people who are continuing working in a remote way. They edit, they have material streamed to them, delivered to them. If you want content from an archive, is the content function? Is the archive functioning is the question. If they're functioning at any level of normality or partial normality, and they can deliver material, and I know that their archives are doing that. I know others that are not. There's the possibility to continue working. I mean, it depends on the subject matter of the production you're making and where you're making it. And do you need to interview people? You can use technology in the way we're using it today to interview somebody. It relies upon the quality of the feed that you get from the service you provide. I don't know if anybody else has got any contribution. I mean, sure, Netflix are making productions virtually as we speak. It depends on the budgets people have and the resources they have, I think, is the answer to that. But Jan, I don't know if...
Yeah, so I know of a broadcaster who went into COVID and there was a hard lockdown in his country. So what they did is that they took a whole number of staff from the broadcaster, especially production operators and technical staff, and they housed them in that building for over 2 weeks, and they used to cook there, and they used to live in that building for the whole period of the lockdown, away from the families and trying to make do the best possible, but yet keeping the broadcasting alive. So I think I know several broadcasters who went through this.
We have some participants from that organization as well. But I would really like them that if they can step up and tell us about their case study. And recently, I think we have seen that many countries have re-telecasted their old dramas, their old programs with bit of color correction, with bit of audio enhancement. So I have one question from for all of you, that you have talked about the colorization of the archive material. What about the reenactment of the original thing? Does it require any kind of license or something like that to reenact the same thing in for any production, film production, or any documentary?
I think if you use the script of creative work and the people reconstructing the events use the same dialogue, then I think there's copyright in the script. But if it's a moment from history where someone does what someone did 50 or 100 years before, then I think that's just a reenactment of history. I don't know if anybody else has got a thought on it, but for me, it depends what intellectual property you borrow, whether you borrow the words, whether you borrow an image. I don't think it's a problem just recreating history. Otherwise, a lot of broadcasters wouldn't have any content to show.
Just like in Titanic, there were several scenes which were reenacted from the original footage, right? So so the producers needed to have some kind of license to use those kind of thing to reenact or recreate that kind of thing, or it isn't required?
Oh, that's I'm not a lawyer. I think I said that last time. I think I'm not wishing to create a naval analogy. It depends how close to the wind you're sailing or an iceberg you're sailing, to know whether you need to have a license on something. Certainly a script, I think, would be protected, but again, it depends on how old the script is. But
everybody is recreating stories, the mythological stories, the Greek mythology, Hindu mythology, and even if you want to pay a royalty, who do you go and pay it to? I don't think it's a problem.
Right.
If you're reenacting a Greek mythology, I mean,
yeah,
nobody has a monopoly on it, right?
Right. There is another question by Mr. Pramodha Kumar Naik. He's from NBM, India. And his question is, what is the archive system, storage system? So maybe he wants to ask that the best possible solution. So I think Mr. Ali Raza is the best one to answer this thing. So what is the most best thing for storing the archives at the moment?
So we've done a lot of analysis on this question, and majority of the people store it in some hard disk somewhere, which has a RAID controller and RAID 5 or RAID 6, etc., etc. But that's not a long-term thing. I mean, how long can you store it on a hard disk? And eventually, no matter how much hard disk you have, you run out of space. So if you look at the cost side of it, then we did a cost calculation, and it seems that the LTO tape is the most cost-effective medium to store. And it seems to be working fine till now. The only problem is that they keep upgrading it. So it's LTO 5, LTO 6, LTO. Now we are on 8, and very soon going on to 9. And the other problem with LTO is that it's backward compatibility. So 8 will be compatible with 7 and 6, but not with 5. So if you have something on LTO 5, then you need to quickly migrate to LTO 8. And it's an ongoing process. It's a never-ending process which you need to keep doing.
Yeah. I mean, one comment, Nabil, is the previous webinar still online?
Yes, it is available on YouTube. After, brother, I would be pasting the previous webinar on the chat box now. So after this webinar, anyone can watch it, and we will be uploading this webinar as well in the coming days.
Yeah, it's just if Pramoda wasn't with us last time, maybe there's some value in watching that to answer that question.
Another question I want to ask Mr. Ali Raza, that some of the broadcasters had this concern that after few times of usage, LTO, the material and LTO tape, it fades a bit. Is it the thing, or is it the right question?
No, it should not, because it's a digital tape.
Okay.
LTO is not an analog magnetic tape. It's a digital tape. So the image stored on the LTO is a digital image.
Right.
So it should not fade. Unlike the video tape in the past, where you make a copy, and whenever you make a copy, then the image keeps deteriorating every time you make a copy. But if it's a digital image, then that should not happen. We have not experienced it. I don't know whether other guys have experienced it.
Perfect. And what about the cloud storage? Is it feasible especially when everyone is trying to devise any mechanism for remote production or something like that?
So again, shall I answer the question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so my knowledge is that a couple of broadcasters did try cloud storage, especially about 5-6 years ago. One of them was in Malaysia, near you. They tried cloud storage, and in the beginning, everything was hunky-dory. Then the bills started coming in, and I think they felt at that time that it's not feasible. Second thing is that when you try the cloud storage, if it works properly, I mean the download and upload speed and all that, if it works properly, it does not make sense in the long run because you can have the same storage. I mean, what are they using? They're using a storage which is put in somebody else's, rack. So why not have the storage in your own rack? So I think the broadcasters came to this fundamental issue quite quickly, and they decided that no. Instead of keep giving every month to the cloud storage company, might as well spend one time and have your own storage inside your own, in your own control, in your own, better that way.
There is another question. Again, I think for Mr. Ali Raza, but anyone of you can also contribute. That how about Blu-ray archival like ODA?
My personal opinion, this is my personal opinion, is that we should not be using technology that is proprietary, because there's one company that is backing it, and obviously they are making it for profit. So if they stop tomorrow, you have archived a lot on your Blu-ray, and then the technology vanishes. How will you read it? So one of my ex-customers faced this problem. They have, even today, they have archive on some old method, and they don't know how to retrieve it.
Right. So, okay. Thank you. There is a comment by Mr. Ronil Narayan. He's from Fiji. He's representing the Fiji government. He has a very nice comment, but I would really like him to come on the grid and comment on this thing if he wants. Let me just allow him.
Yeah, we know Ronil for many years. Great guy.
Yes. So I'm promoting him as a panelist. So if he can unmute his microphone. All right. All right, let me just read it from him. I like the idea of originality, and here in Fiji, our ministry is producing and broadcasting our video content from as early as 70s. We have programmed Back in Time, which brings stories from history, cultural aspects, which people amazingly loves to watch. So we have maintained the footages onto our servers. So again, digital. We have many people from Nigeria. If anyone wants to come on the grid, I will be surely like to have them on the grid. Rather, what I do is that I would like to push everyone to the grid so we can have a bit of networking. And yeah, Ronald is there.
Yeah, Ronald, hi, Bula. Just to say, it's great that you've got material from the 70s and it's now in a digital form. I just pray that the film itself is somewhere safe and protected, and hasn't been lost in the process of migration. And if Fiji needs support in terms of safe storage advice, then I'm sure you have neighbors in your part of the world who could offer some of that. Jan is holding up his finger. I will turn off my mic.
Yeah, I would like to say that we're more than happy to help if there's anything that you might need from us in Australia. We recently got some funding from the government here to reach out to Pacific countries from an archival perspective. So let's catch up later, Ronil, but we're happy to help.
Sure, thank you.
All right, there is another question by Mr. Nitin Dorji. He is from Bhutan Broadcasting Service. Besides historical and cultural footage, which other footage should we consider for archiving? Experts.
Oh, I think if something was created, it's important to keep because it speaks about us, our times, our world. It's a record of who we were, how we were, where we were. So the fact it exists generally, unless, you know, I mean, there's certain things which are unique. Anything that has even today, the remotest potential for being culturally significant, I think should be protected. There are very skilled decisions taken about what is significant. Archivists decide what is of value. But for me, if there was an ideal world and there was infinite resources, we keep everything. The reality is we can't keep everything. I'm not sure every piece of webcam footage that's shot as you drive around your neighborhood merits preservation. But once a month, maybe it merits it. Once a year, it maybe merit it because it's a record of how your neighborhood changed. If you drive with a camera on your motorcycle or your helmet, it chronicles the town, place, neighborhood you live in. It's important. I don't know where we stop. I don't know how we save it all, but we have to care. I think that's all I can say.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, guys. And if you have any feedback and suggestions, or if you want to have any customized kind of workshop, which we can help, which we can assist you, feel free to ask for that on at training@aibd.org.my and stay connected with us for our next upcoming webinars at our Facebook page, facebook.com/myaibd.